This lesson for the Erlbacher Gearhart teaches the traditional Gearhart method for starting a sock with a 3-row ribbed selvage. The ribbed cuff of this pair of glorious fuchsia socks is what the video will show. There are settings I mark to make my ribbing easier. These dots of red pinpoint that perfect place to set the ribber stop. Or a dot of red placed on the opposite side of the ribber stop will center the dial, making it much easier to line up the ribber and set the dial stop into just the right spot. Without any knitting, set the ribber on. Rotate the dial to the right until you hear it hit the cylinder pin. Note that without knitting, the red dot on the front appears too far to the left, but with knitting between the pin and the stop, it will be perfectly centered. Colorful 3D fabric paint like these add dots of bold color that are easy to see when needed, but can be quickly removed without chemicals. To seal, add a drop of clear nail enamel. To remove, just pop the dry dot off and throw it away. As you watch the ribber action, note where the ribber needle is as it and the next cylinder needle are making their stitch. This is your ribber timing in action, and it was preset at the Erlbacher shop. But adjustments will be needed to other parts as you change yarn styles and cylinders. Here is how to adjust the height of the dial, the yarn carrier, the stitch size, and the in and out selvage lever. To adjust the dial height, have the ribber mounted. Take the smallest Allen wrench in your EG toolkit and push the long end up into the Allen screw inside the ribber guide pin as shown. As you turn it to the right, it raises the dial. As you turn it back to the left, it allows you to push it back down. For most yarns, the bottom of the dial is best set level with the top of the cylinder. Adjusting the yarn carrier is easy. All you need is a small Phillips screwdriver. Release the mounting screw just enough to raise the carrier so the bottom edge will clear the ribber needles. Cinch it down, and remember, you do this last after you've adjusted the dial. Red dots highlight the end of the pointer and the center of the ribber stitch size adjustment. Yellow for thick yarn and green for thin. To set, turn the knob to the right as you brace the pointer, then tighten it down. To loosen, turn it to the left. For the ribber needles to come out and make new stitches, set the lever to the green dot labeled in. To push the lever over to the out is to stop the needles from making any new stitch. Now the ribber is adjusted, set the cylinder up so every other slot has a needle, making room for the ribber needles to make a 1x1 rib. Place in your cast-on sack or bonnet and hang it. Put a knot in the bottom and hang your weights. About 3.5 to 5 pounds is enough. Bring in your high contrast sport weight smooth cotton and crank around about 10 rows. Now it's time to add your adjusted ribber. Make sure that you take the red dot on the side of the dial and set it right there on the right hand target needle on the front. That places the stop right next to the pin. Start to crank around to make sure the dial seats right where the red dot centers on the target needle red on either side. Just as shown here. The original etching that shows where to start adding needles or taking needles out
is the best guideline for this. So we'll match that and start placing our needles with the ribber arm to our left, just past the yellow half mark. We'll add our needles. The most important part here is get those latches open. As the ribber rolls around, it's going to bring the yarn. If the latches aren't open, the ribber needles can't pick up and make a rib stitch. As it's ribbing, watch and make sure all of the ribbing needles have a good stitch going. Clip your waste yarn just a few inches, about 3 or 4, past the back side of the yarn carrier. Now with the needle, thread the hole with the sock yarn and place it exactly where you want it, right down in between the dial and the cylinder, and pick it up, reaching from underneath. Thread it through the yarn carrier, going in between the needle hooks and the face of the yarn carrier. That way, the yarn will be picked up immediately.
Go to your row counter now and set it ready for the first ribber row count. Begin to crank around and watch as the stitches of the new fuchsia sock yarn get picked up. Stop at the left front target needle and look where you're pointing there. That's your first stitches with the fuchsia. The contrast between your waste yarn and your sock yarn is really important. Position your yarn carrier right over the area of the first stitch. It's now time to take the lever and move it over to the out position so that the ribber needles will not come out and make new stitches. For 2 rounds, the only needles that would be making new stitches will be the cylinder needles. That's the first round, number 1, and that's the second round. Now we take the lever that's out and put it back in over to the green and to the word in. Now you have ribbing going with your selvage made. It was that easy. If for any reason you see any drop stitches, stop and see if you need to adjust by changing a ribbing needle. Make sure you're not using both big hook and standard needles. You can use big hook needles. I do. That's what's in the machine right now. But don't use both of them together. Use one or the other. Now we've done all of the ribbing that we need to do our cuff. That was about 60 rows. We need to place cylinder needles into our cylinder so that we have needles to place our ribber stitches on. Again, we're going to be doing it the same way the original Gearhart manual says. We work with the ribber arm over to the left hand half mark and come around and work toward the right, always working between the ribber arm and the front of the tappet plate. Watch as we pull the needle out, lift up the heel, and pull the stitch over the cylinder needle. It's very simple, and with just a little practice, you can do this fairly easily. Just lift that stitch over. Push the ribber needle out, tip it, lift up the heel of the needle, and just lift the stitch over the cylinder needle and leave it on.
Push it out, tip it, lift it up, and pull the stitch over. This is in real time, not the slow time as before. And sometimes it slips either side. As long as you keep the needle pointed down, the stitch will stay on the ribber needle and you won't drop your stitch. You do this all the way around, working from the left all the way around to the right in the same direction that you crank. First, you place your needles for your cylinder into the open slots. Then, you go back and start transferring your ribber stitches back over to your cylinder needles. It really doesn't take very long to do this. And it's rare that you'll drop a stitch. If you do, have a tool ready because usually you can pick that stitch up and set it right on the needle. Now we've just got a few more to go and we'll be ready to take off our ribber and we'll be able to see our ribbed cuff. Now we take the ribber off, and there it is. Voila, beautiful, beautiful ribbing. We crank around to do our ankle. And that's where we want to have the stitches just a little bit tighter. So we'll tighten it up just a quarter by turning it back to the left. We'll crank around 20 rows and then we'll be ready for our heel.